So recently, I was watching this clip from East Africa where a whole section of farmland just opened. There is this paved road running across the landscape, little houses on either side, people going about their lives, and then suddenly there is a trench where the road used to be. The asphalt drops away. Fence posts are hanging in midair. You can see layers of soil like someone sliced the earth with a giant knife. Everyone on the video is standing at the edge, phones out, looking down like, what did this? You hear people saying it has to be a sinkhole, or bad construction, or just heavy rain. And you get that because your brain wants it to be some small local problem. Something the government can patch with a truck full of gravel and a few guys in reflective vests. But when geologists look at that same scene, they see something completely different. They see one tiny tear on a scar that runs from the Red Sea, down through Ethiopia and Kenya, into Tanzania and beyond. That crack in the road is a little surface reminder that a whole piece of Africa is in the middle of a very slow, very real breakup. There is this thing called the East African Rift. You can see it from space. Long valleys, lines of volcanoes, huge lakes that sit in these deep, narrow basins. For a long time, that was just pretty scenery to most people. Wow, cool cliffs. Look at that lake. But underneath that is a simple, kind of terrifying truth. That whole region is where the continent is being pulled apart. Think about the ground under your feet as something solid. We grow up with that idea. Concrete, bedrock, foundations. You sink posts, you pour footings, you expect them to stay put. Under all of that, though, the crust is basically a bunch of slabs floating on top of very slow, very hot rock. Those slabs, those plates, drift. They bump, grind, dive under each other, and sometimes they pull away. East Africa is one of the places where that pulling is happening right now. Geologists break Africa into big blocks. One is the main African plate, sometimes called the Nubian plate. To the east, there is another block, the Somali plate. At the boundary between them, the crust has been under tension for millions of years. It stretches, it thins, and every so often, it breaks. That break is what we call a rift. It is not like ripping paper. It is more like slowly pulling on old leather. You pull, it stretches, it creaks, tiny cracks form, and then one day a seam gives way. Sometimes that one day is a night when people in a village in Kenya sit up in bed because they hear a low rumbling. The ground shivers, and the next morning there is a new fracture in the field where their goats graze. One of the wildest examples comes from this region in Ethiopia called Afar. If you ever see footage from there, it does not look like the rest of the continent. It looks like another planet. Bare rock, yellow and green pools full of acidic water, steam vents everywhere. It is brutally hot. Under that surface, the crust is being torn open as hot material from deeper in the earth pushes up. A few years back, scientists had instruments scattered all over that area because they knew the ground was under a lot of stress. They had sensors listening for earthquakes, satellites measuring tiny changes in height, everything. Then one season, the system lit up. Dozens of small quakes, then bigger ones. The ground rose and fell by a few centimeters. People working out there came back the next day and found brand new cracks running across the desert. In one event, a slab of crust several kilometers long dropped a couple of meters and slid sideways. Magma had forced its way into a vertical sheet under their feet, prying the plates apart. At the surface, it looked like a fresh wound in the earth. Down below, it was the rift doing exactly what a rift does, opening the continent a little more. The thing people misunderstand is the time scale. You say Africa is splitting in two, and it sounds like something that could happen in a couple of lifetimes. That is not how this works. The plates move at speeds measured in millimeters a year. Your fingernails grow faster. The dramatic stuff you see on the news, like a big crack crossing a highway, is a tiny adjustment in a system that has been grinding along for millions of years and will keep going for tens of millions more. But if you add those millimeters up over the whole timeline, you get something huge. You get a brand new ocean. You can already see the early version of that if you zoom out. Up north, the Red Sea is a rift that filled with water. Same with the Gulf of Aden. They started as cracks, stretched, dropped, and eventually let seawater in. The East African Rift is like the third arm of that setup, but it is still mostly on land. It is a valley system that future maps will probably show as a long, narrow sea running right down the middle of the continent. Imagine taking the chunk of land that has Somalia, the Horn of Africa, parts of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, peeling that slowly away from the main body of Africa and letting the Indian Ocean flood between them. Not next century, not for any of us. But in geologic time, that is the direction things are heading. If you have ever seen the Rift Valley in person, it is strange to think about that. You can stand on a viewpoint outside Nairobi, look out over this huge drop where the land falls away into a flat floor with volcanoes rising out of it, and it just looks like a beautiful view. There are farms down there, roads, towns, people going about their day. It does not scream future ocean. But you talk to people who live along that valley and they will tell you stories. Little quakes that knock plates off shelves. Springs that suddenly go cloudy after a tremor because the plumbing underground just changed. New cracks opening in dirt tracks after a night of rumbling. None of it is end-of-the-world level disaster. It is just the crust constantly reminding them that it is under tension. That crack in Kenya that went viral a while ago, the one that cut a road and tore through farmland, did not come out of nowhere. There had been heavy rain, sure. The water softened the surface, made it easier for the ground to slump. But the line where it opened followed an ancient fault. Beneath that farm, the rock was already broken along that plain. The rain was just a push that allowed part of it to drop. From one angle, that is comforting. The land is not randomly betraying you. It is following old weaknesses. From another angle, it is worse, because it means a lot of seemingly normal ground has those scars running through it, invisible until the day something gives. The rift does more than crack roads. It reshapes whole landscapes. Take the lakes. Lakes like Tanganyika, Malawi, Turkana, they do not sit in shallow bowls. Those are deep cuts in the crust. Some of them go down thousands of meters. They are old too. Fish have been evolving in them, cut off from the rest of the world, long enough that you get these wild species you do not find anywhere else. Those lakes exist because blocks of crust dropped between faults as the rift opened. One side of the valley tilted, the other stayed higher, and the low part filled with water. The same process creates those long, straight cliffs you see in pictures, where one edge of the rift is this huge wall of rock, and the other side slopes away more gently. Volcanoes ride this system as well. Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, all those cones dotting the rift are not random piles of rock. They grew where cracks let magma rise up from the mantle. The rift is like a stretched seam in fabric. The more it pulls, the easier it is for hot rock to reach the surface. That is why you see chains of volcanoes lining up along it. There is a kind of feedback there. The same heat that pushes magma up also warms rocks at depth, which helps the crust keep stretching. In places like Afar, the crust has already thinned so much that the boundary between crust and mantle is significantly shallower than beneath the rest of Africa. That is part of why the surface there looks so strange. The hot stuff under the lid is closer than usual. I like the human side of this story as much as the geology. People have been living in and around this rift for an incredibly long time. Some of the most famous early human fossils come from rift valleys. You get these deep gorges where rivers have cut down through layers of sediment, exposing bone beds and old tools. Those early hominins were walking along lakes and cliffs that were created by the same stretching process that is still going on now. So you have this situation where the very landscape that was essential to our evolution is also quietly working on a long-term plan to tear itself in half. It is not all danger either. The rift brings gifts. Volcanic soils can be extremely fertile. Farmers on the slopes of those volcanoes grow crops in ground that has been fed by ash and weathered lava. Hot springs are everywhere. People use them for bathing, for salt, for minerals. Geothermal energy is starting to get tapped along parts of the rift to power towns and cities. The same heat that makes the crust restless can run a turbine and keep the lights on. But the trade-off is that the whole system is inherently unstable. You build a highway across what looks like solid ground. 10 years later, a section starts to sag because the block under it is tilting. You put a village near a beautiful escarpment, and once in a while rock falls come down because the cliff is the edge of a fault that has moved within living memory. The new ocean. Part of the story tends to get turned into a movie line, but there is a straightforward logic to it. When a rift continues long enough, several things happen one after the other. First, the crust stretches and thins. Second, that thin crust starts to tear in patches, and blocks drop down between faults. Third, those low blocks can sink to the point where they are below sea level. When there is a connection to the ocean, water pours in. Over time, the Rift Valley becomes a narrow sea like the Red Sea. Given more time and continued spreading, that sea can widen into an ocean basin like the Atlantic. Africa is at the early to middle stages of that in the east. The Red Sea and Gulf of Aden already exist as flooded rifts. The East African Rift is still mostly dry, but some of its lakes are salty and sit below sea level. You can see the script being written. The timing is the only thing that is hard to feel, because it is so far beyond our personal sense of time. I think about some kid in a house that now sits somewhere along the rift in Kenya. They wake up to stories about the crack that opened down the road a few years back. They hear their parents talk about little earthquakes that rattled dishes. They see scientists come through once in a while, setting up instruments on tripods, drilling short cores into the ground, talking to village leaders about risk and monitoring. For that kid, the rift is just background. It is something adults worry about, the same way we grow up near a coastline and hear about erosion, or near a river and hear about floods. The difference is that in their case, the background story, if you zoom out, is over a long enough period, this whole piece of land is going to pack its bags and drift away from the rest of the continent. There is a humility in that. We like to think of the shapes of continents as permanent. You buy a globe, and Africa is that big chunky piece in the middle. It has been there your entire life. It will look like that on every map you see. The rift is like a quiet note under all of that saying, do not get too attached. We are in the middle of a slow motion remodel. There is also this sort of psychological whiplash when you see those cracks. They look like earthquake damage or bad road work. To find out that they are tied into a structure that is thousands of kilometers long and millions of years old, that your broken driveway lives on a line that connects to volcanoes and seas, is a trip. That is why that Kenyan crack and the others like it hit so hard on the internet. They are visible, relatable, human scale. You can stand next to a 3-meter deep trench and feel it in your stomach. Then you learn that it is part of the same system that will, in some distant future, redraw the map of Africa, and suddenly the ground under your feet feels less like a stage and more like a living, shifting thing you are borrowing for a while. So when you hear this newly discovered crack in Africa shows the continent is splitting in two, it is not clickbait. It is just compressing a very slow, very big process into something your brain can grab. A road that falls away, a field that slumps, a village that wakes up to find a new line in the earth. Under all of that, the plates keep moving. The rift keeps opening. The volcanoes along it keep breathing. The lakes keep deepening. At human scale, it is noise and nuisance and occasional disaster. At planetary scale, it is the first chapter in the story of a new ocean, already being written under the feet of people who are just trying to get to work on time.